Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. We're seeing the highest gas prices in decades, but the White House today says U.S. oil companies are not producing enough. And what's the administration doing next for energy security? Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting Eastern Europe amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He's also pressing China to condemn the invasion. And as Russia has picked up its offensive in major cities throughout Ukraine, the United States has given the go-ahead to Poland to offer fighter jets to Ukraine. But could this provoke Russia even further? We take a look. Gas prices have climbed to the highest in 14 years, and the U.S. is turning to Venezuela as it considers banning Russian oil imports. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
The U.S. has not made a decision about a potential Russian oil embargo.
Well, no decision has been made at this point by the president, and those discussions are ongoing internally and also with our counterparts and partners in Europe and around the world.
The uncertainty comes amid a growing call for harsher sanctions on Russia. And top Democrats and Republicans said today they had reached a deal to ban Russian energy imports and to suspend Russia's normal trade relations. But the ramifications are hard to ignore, as gas prices in the U.S. are already pushing above $4 a gallon. The White House also confirms that senior U.S. officials traveled to Venezuela this weekend to talk with Nicolas Maduro's regime. It's seeking to repair hostile relations since Venezuela is the top oil exporter. But some question the morality of trying to drive down prices by doing business with Maduro's regime. Others question why the U.S. is not producing more oil on its own. But the White House reiterates that Biden will not reopen the Keystone XL pipeline.
And there are 9,000 unused approved drilling permits. So I would suggest you ask the oil companies why they're not using those if there's a desire to drill more.
Axios reports that Biden may be exploring additional options for oil with a possible trip to Saudi Arabia, but the White House today refused to confirm it. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Jim Hansen is a retired member of the U.S. Army Special Forces and president of the Security Studies Group. He's here with us to assess the situation in Ukraine. Jim Hansen, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Good to be with you.
Now, Jim, you were a former U.S. Army Special Forces. You also understand politics very well. Strategically, based on what you've seen unfold, is Putin's strategy starting to make sense? Can you kind of see what his ultimate goal here in Ukraine will be?
I've known what his ultimate goal was from the beginning, and it was to gain recognition for Crimea, to take official control of the two Russian-speaking provinces, and at that point to use a further incursion into Ukraine proper as a bargaining chip to get sanctions removed and the rest of it. And I said that almost 2 weeks ago, and it's played out right now. The official Kremlin spokesman has laid those things, plus a piece saying that Ukraine should not join any military blocs such as NATO out as their demands. So I think this is playing out pretty much as Vlad expected, except for the fact that his military vastly underperformed.
Now, Jim, Putin recently made some comments that if Ukraine continues on the path that it is heading on, which is essentially defending itself, that it will be responsible for the consequences. Does this imply a complete Russian takeover of Ukraine? Is that a real possibility?
You know, if it was a real possibility, I think the Ukrainians have proved that the degree of difficulty was a lot higher than Russia had calculated, and that the Russian military is a lot less capable than Vlad had been told. So I don't believe it really ever was his goal to take and keep Ukraine, because I can't imagine many places other than Afghanistan that would have a more powerful and dangerous insurgency if you managed to topple their government. You might take it, you could keep it at a very, very high cost in blood and treasure.
Now, Jim, the U.S. has essentially given Poland the green light, Poland being a NATO member, to supply Ukraine with aircraft, fighter jets. How does Russia view this, and does this heighten tensions between the U.S. and Russia?
It absolutely heightens tensions between the U.S. and Russia, because those are, at some level, those are NATO aircraft. I mean, Poland can give them to Ukraine and say, well, this is outside of our function as a NATO member. Putin does not see it that way and does not have to see it that way. And I think that vastly increases the danger. So I think whatever off-ramp there is right now with the Kremlin spokesman's offer to, take what was almost a fait accompli. Crimea is definitely part of Russia at this point, for all intents and purposes. The two Russian-speaking provinces were in everything but name, and now they're asking for independence. And at that point, if they're independent, they will almost certainly join the Russian Federation. And then the idea of Ukraine becoming non-aligned officially doesn't seem like a big ask given the damage and death and destruction being wrought in Ukraine right now.
Now, we've been seeing some video and some reports of Russian aircraft being taken out. What type of anti-aircraft capability does Ukraine have?
A lot more than the Russians were thinking they did. They've got Stingers and other man-portable devices. They've got some higher-level anti-aircraft capabilities. What they also have, though, is the Russians have been not particularly good at the tactics they've been using. I mean, one of the more famous shots is an attack helicopter being ambushed. And you can't ambush an attack helicopter unless it's flying a route you knew it was going to be on. So I think the Russians are making some mistakes, and I think the technology and the capabilities that Ukraine had and has been given have made it a lot more dangerous for the Russians to think they can fly unopposed.
Now, we've been hearing that there have been multiple assassination attempts on Ukraine President Zelensky. The Russians are famous for these types of things. How long will he be able to avoid these attempts? And how challenging do you think it is to elude Russian forces as they make their way into the capital city of Kiev?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be Zelensky. That's a dangerous job. I also think the Ukrainians have been very good about pushing information out that helps their cause. So whether there were actually 3 assassination attempts that he's avoided, or whether they said there were in order to gain support, doesn't really matter. It worked. And I think at this point, he does have a target on his back, and that's not going to change. Although I think if what Russia actually wants, and I believe it is this not quite a peace deal, but this land grab deal that they're proposing, then I think at that point, Zelensky becomes a little bit less of a danger to them, and I don't think taking him out would be advantageous for them.
Former U.S. Army Special Forces Jim Hansen, thank you.
Good to be with you.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting Eastern European countries in response to the war between Russia and Ukraine. On Saturday, he also talked to China's top diplomat. Blinken is expecting China to condemn Russia, as Beijing often speaks about the sanctity of sovereignty.
The other day,
in an interview with CNN on Sunday, Blinken said he spent 1 hour talking to the Chinese foreign minister.
China speaks often about the sanctity of this principle of sovereignty. We would expect China, based on everything it's said in the past, to stand up and make its voice heard. Its voice is very important in this. And 141 countries in the UN system came forward to condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine and to stand up for Ukraine.
The United Nations passed a resolution last Wednesday condemning Russia's invasion. 141 countries, including the U.S., voted in favor. 35 nations, including China, Cuba, and Iran, abstained. 5 countries, including Russia, voted against. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is calling on Congress to speed up weapons sales to Taiwan. He tweeted saying, so that Taiwan can safeguard their future against China. MasterCard and Visa have suspended their operations in Russia. Russian banks now look to Chinese financial services to support Russian credit card transactions. MasterCards and Visa cards issued in Russia will no longer be accepted outside of Russia, and the cards issued outside of Russia will no longer work inside of Russia. Russian banks are now turning to China's UnionPay system to issue new credit cards instead, also known as China UnionPay. The financial company provides bank card services mostly in mainland China. According to Russia's central bank, China's UnionPay also operates in 180 other countries. The Chinese system will replace suspended Visa and MasterCard services for Russian citizens. At an event last week, we had a chance to speak with Colorado Congressman Ken Buck. We asked him about the possibility of China using the Ukraine-Russia conflict to make a move on Taiwan. We also asked what he thinks President Putin's endgame might be. Here's a look. Congressman Ken Buck, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
It's my pleasure.
Congressman, we're here now. Russia has officially invaded Ukraine. What do you think their endgame is, and do you see a situation where things de-escalate?
Well, Putin has talked about the fact that he wants to recreate the old Soviet Union. This is one step in that direction. I don't know if he continues. Certainly there will be a NATO response, a greater NATO response if he does continue. I think that part of his end game is to squeeze Western Europe with energy, using energy as the leverage. I think that this is really going to have some tremendous ramifications. I think that NATO will be more unified than it has been. I think the Western European nations are going to spend more on defense than they have, and I think that the United States will be a much closer ally in the future.
Do you think that this is a time that magnifies the importance that the United States becomes even more energy independent?
Well, you would hope. You would think that President Biden would understand that we can produce the energy that we need as well as export natural gas to other countries, relieve some of the pressure on Western Europe and their dependence on natural gas from Russia. So we should be turning on the spigots. We should be allowing our energy producers to go at it. We have huge natural gas reserves in this country, natural gas reserves that will last much longer than 100 years. And why we aren't doing that right now is beyond me. And the people are going to feel it at the gas pump. And that's really where the political pressure is going to come to bear.
Now, the United States seems to get distracted at critical moments, whether it be the war on terror. Now you have this incursion that distracts from the CCP. So with that said, is that a concern?
I think it's a concern. I think this president has been distracted in a lot of situations. And I'm reticent to criticize him in the middle of a world conflict, but I think it's important to note that he has sent mixed signals. These economic sanctions up to this point have been weak and have not really caused Putin to rethink any of his strategy. I think that President Biden needs to really understand that there are evil actors in the world, and we need to confront those evil actors.
Now, Congressman, at a recent press conference in China, a CCP spokesperson refused to acknowledge this invasion as an invasion of Ukraine. What do you think a China-Russia alliance would mean for the national security of the United States and the security of the world?
Well, I think they have an alliance. It's a loose alliance at this point, but certainly they each have in opposite directions an interest, and I think that they are executing on that interest. So I think they have mutual interest in terms of the alliance that we have with Western Europe. They certainly have an alliance with each other. I don't think that it is in anybody's interest to start a world war or to try to change the balance of power at this point in time. And so I don't think that they will act on that alliance, but individually they certainly will make the moves that they have been talking about for years.
Congressman Ken Buck, thank you.
Thank you.
Elected officials debate whether to ban Russian energy amidst soaring gas prices. There might be a solution, but can our elected officials agree? As the situation in Ukraine plays out, what is Communist China's next move? And will how the U.S. responds to Ukraine be the playbook for how the CCP asserts itself into Taiwan? The National Guard is on standby for the trucker convoy in the D.C. area, which is protesting pandemic restrictions. We'll tell you more about the convoy's plans. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. Gas and oil prices have skyrocketed to their highest levels since 2008. The average gas price in the U.S. is now over $4 per gallon. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told NBC over the weekend that he was talking with allies about the feasibility of banning Russian oil imports. Bipartisan support has been building in Congress, but the White House is concerned that a ban will add to the rising costs. One solution is to reverse policies that hindered gas and oil production at home, but many Democrats are opposing this solution. Elon Musk supports the idea, even though it would negatively affect Tesla, his electric vehicle company. Musk tweeted, "Increased oil and gas production in short term is critical, or people around the world will be placed under great duress. This is not a question of money, it is a question of having enough energy to power civilization." The House is moving to isolate Russia and ban its energy imports. Nancy Pelosi wrote a letter to colleagues on Sunday saying that the House is exploring legislation to isolate Russia from the global economy. The bill would ban the import of Russian oil and energy products into the United States. It would also aim to repeal normal trade relations with Russia and Belarus. Pelosi's letter noted that the Biden administration and Congress were encouraged that U.S. allies, especially the European Union, will reduce dependence on Russian energy resources. And Senator Joe Manchin is continuing his push to ban imports of Russian oil.
Putin has weaponized energy. He's weaponized the gas and the oil that flows. That's his money machine. We can offset that. We have to.
Last week, Manchin introduced a bipartisan bill to halt U.S. imports of Russian oil. Our next guest is James CARAFANO, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and currently a national security expert at the Heritage Foundation. We're happy to have him on. James CARAFANO, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
It's good to be with you.
Now, James, on the energy front, we're seeing oil going haywire right now. There's talk of Biden going to Saudi Arabia. I believe a delegation was sent down to Venezuela, all in an attempt to shore up energy. But I want to ask you about the elephant in the room. Why are we not producing oil in our own country when we have that capability?
Well, I think it's exactly the right question. I mean, this has to be a package deal. Look, it makes no sense for us to be buying oil from Russia, or for that matter, Venezuela, or Iran, all of them dictatorships who are anti-American, closely aligned with China, and who will just use that cash inflow to do things against America. And it makes us more dependent on them. So that makes no sense whatsoever. It makes far more sense to rapidly move to increase our domestic production. Look, even the signal, the statement that we are going to rapidly move to increase domestic production would send a powerful calming influence to the markets. And instead, what we have is an administration which is so desperate not to offend, far left progressive voices which are trying to kill domestic oil and gas industry above uber alles, that they will literally go and make deals with countries against our own interests that will marginalize America's security and influence abroad in order to not upset people who just don't like America's oil and gas industry.
Now, James, you just touched upon it. There is talk about the stopping the purchase of Russian oil. If that were to happen, what effect might this have on Russia and both the United States?
Well, look, oil is a global commodity, and oil is going to flow to customers. And so if the United States says, we're just not going to buy this oil, that oil will find its way to another customer, even with sanctions and everything else. It only makes sense if you want the price of oil to come down, and if you want to pump up American security, to rapidly move to increase domestic production. And what's so incredibly frustrating about this is we know the United States can do this. We just did it. I mean, over 4 years under the last president, we rapidly moved to a point where we were actually driving global energy markets, where we could have conversations with OPEC and saying our energy production was so powerful that we were telling the other customers in the market, stop your anti-market, anti-competitive behaviors, because we can drive we can drive energy availability with U.S. production.
Now, James, do you think that the United States has learned anything based on what we're seeing play out in Ukraine with Russia in terms of how to, correct or have a course correction when it comes to the policy and dealing with Taiwan? And what do you think is the best way to move forward?
Well, first of all, I think in terms of Chinese aggression at Taiwan, I mean, they didn't need Ukraine to be aggressive. And China's going to proceed at China's agenda, not necessarily leverage something off what the Ukraine did. I think the Chinese are watching how the West responds in Ukraine very closely. And ironically, I think the solution set for both is relatively the same. You know, what makes Russia a threat to us is they have a military and they sell people out of energy. So if we have strong conventional and strategic deterrence, we do our part, allies do their part, their military is not a threat to us. If we have energy independence, if Europe rethinks its policies to have reliable, abundant, affordable energy, then energy blackmail is off the table. And underlying both of those is, look, we've got to unleash this economy. It has to grow as fast as it possibly can without dependence on people who are basically out to destroy us. And again, America energy independence allows us to lead from the world in confidence. Those kinds of things scare the heck out of the Chinese, because the one problem that the Biden administration has had, if you think about this, I was in the military for 25 years, and I'm a military historian. I've written a lot. You never want to be in a situation where the enemy gets to decide what to do, and you're just reacting to them. That's the worst possible scenario. You always want to be in a situation where you are pushing them and making them react to you. Everything this presidency has done is responding to external threats. It's almost like they want to forget about foreign policy and just put their head in the sand, and then they only pull it out when a crisis explodes. What they have to do is put America in a position of strength where our adversaries and our competitors are responding to us, not the other way around. And what undergirds that? A strong military that can defend our interests, energy independence, and a roaring economy. If we got those three fundamentals right, and we secured our border, because to be honest with you, having the world's most open and vulnerable border at a time of international crisis at this, to me, makes absolutely no sense. If we did those things, then I think America's position in the world would be very secure, and I think the Chinese and the Russians and Iranians would be worried about us as opposed to the other way around.
James CARAFANO, as always, appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
The Biden administration is asking federal employees to resume working from the office. Twice last week, the president urged workers to return to in-person work and to once again fill the downtown district and office buildings. His message on Friday was directed specifically at federal employees. Most have been teleworking from home since early 2020. The federal government spends several billions of dollars annually leasing office space. Most have been virtually empty since the start of the pandemic. Agencies which reopened their offices for limited hours to allow access have not seen employees returning. The lack of commuters has created a severe impact on small businesses in D.C., as well as on the public transportation system. The global death toll of the CCP virus surpassed 6 million today, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University. During the last 28 days, nearly 54,000 people in the United States have died from the CCP virus. They account for about 20% of the global total. However, the death toll is likely significantly higher throughout the world, but due to the lack of transparency of data from the country where the pandemic began, Communist China, it is hard to calculate the actual number of total deaths. And starting today, every household in the United States will be able to order an additional set of 4 free at-home COVID tests. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin extended National Guard support in Washington, D.C., due to the trucker convoy protesting President Biden's vaccine mandates and other restrictions. At least 1,000 vehicles departed a rally in Maryland and looped the 64-mile Capitol Beltway on Sunday, as well-wishers cheered on highway overpasses. Supporters waved American flags throughout their trek, originating in California and going across the country. Participants plan to visit Congress on Tuesday without their trucks. It is worth noting that the convoy, since embarking on the cross-country journey over a week ago, has been a peaceful protest. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.